Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Crossover Media featured programmer segment with USC Radio's evening host and assistant program director, Rik Malone. Rik oversees programming for Classical KDFC in San Francisco, KUSC in Los Angeles, and the translators reached in around the state of California, reached by the USC network. Rik is also the radio voice and producer of the San Francisco Symphony. He'll be chatting today with Crossover Media's Max Horowitz. Over to you, Max.
Hey, Rik, how you doing?
I'm good, Max. How are you? This is fun. We've known each other for so long. We're finally getting a chance to do something, broadcast professional together, kind of thing. So.
Oh, this is very professional.
It's been a while.
The height of professionalism. Absolutely.
Clearly. I do want to clarify something though that Amanda said in my introduction. I'm only the evening host for KDFC. I don't want to take any props away from Jim Shveda, who's the legend on KUSC radio in the evening. So.
You know, that's a great point. First of all, congratulations on this incredible honor that we've bestowed on you, being, Programmer of the Week.
Thank you. I'm basking in the glory right now. It's a nice thing. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's easy to get lost in the grind of the day-to-day programming, and you see the list of pieces and the list of things, and you're looking at the grid and you think, where is this really going? And does it really make that much difference? And then you hear from listeners every so often. You hear from folks like you guys, and I deal with you email all the time or sending press releases, and it just sort of all goes into the wash. But finally, there's contact and there's reality, and instead of imagining that I'm talking to somebody out there, I actually am. So
that really is a great point. Actually, I mean. It sounds a little sentimental, but it actually is a very good point because it's absolutely true. And, we're all buried under work all the time. And so I do kind of view this as, we're taking a moment here to spend some time together and, and do a nice thing here.
Yeah, all we need is a drink with an umbrella in it,
Absolutely. To your point that you just made about Jim Shveda in Los Angeles, you program both of these stations now, and this is a fairly recent adjustment that's happened, or
right. It's just within the last couple of years.
Right, and it was a question I was going to ask you a little later, but we might as well get right to it. KDFC, you're programming KDFC, which is one type of station, and then you're also programming KUSC. So, this is not, a syndicated situation where, you've got one announcer, broadcasting on both stations, but you're programming two separate stations that are really quite different.
That's not entirely true. Certainly the heritage of the two stations is very, very different. KDFC having been commercial station up until about four years and change ago, and KUSC with its long heritage as a public listener-supported station. And when Entercom, KDFC's former owners, decided to sell the property and flip the format on the old frequency, they had been in touch with USC Radio, which had wanted to expand up into this market anyway for quite some time. And the opportunity just presented itself that KUSC acquired the intellectual property of KDFC. The stations remained separate for the first couple of years, but I think, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I think the plan all along had been to somehow pull the two stations more towards a central programming idea from two opposite ends, and they were really two opposite ends. The approaches were very, very different, and you had to be, with one being commercial and one being non-commercial. But I think what's happened over the last couple of years with the merger of the programming departments is that KDFC needed to move more towards a public radio model, obviously, and public radio audiences expect more from their classical radio station than we were able to give them as a commercial station. And KUSC was kind of in a slump for both numbers and contributions, and needed to find a way to move its programming a little more towards the middle to bring those numbers up. And Brenda Barnes, who's the president of USC Radio, felt that best way to do this was to have Bill Luth, who had been program director at KDFC exclusively, supervise the programming at both stations and move them both in the opposite directions towards a sort of a middle ground. So the two stations still have their distinct personalities, broadcasting the music on the air. But for the most part, the programming is done from here, under my supervision. Dennis Bartel, who's the morning announcer at KUSC, still has a certain degree of autonomy. Jim Schweda, the evening host, does all of his own programming. And so his whole theme and his whole atmosphere that he's built up around the evening show remains intact. We obviously work together to make sure that there's no duplication in programming. But by and large, yeah, the overnights, the prime time, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or so, pretty much mirror each other on the two stations. Now, we'll split from time to time. We'll obviously split when one station is having a pledge drive. We'll split when one station is doing a special program, special promotion, the way KUSC's Musical Mystery Tour was last week. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to keep track of the rotations, but we manage. Yeah.
Right, and when KDFC was commercial, or the way that I have always perceived the station and continue to perceive the station actually, is it's a very different sort of station. It's almost a station, a classical station that exists alone. It reminds me of the station where we met, WNCN in New York.
Right.
It reminds me of that sensibility, which is very populist, almost like an adult contemporary station.
Absolutely. Well, that was the whole idea, and it was really WNCN in New York with Mario Mazza, and the old KKHI out here when Bill Luth was the program director here, which were the two stations that really were in the vanguard of that populist movement in classical radio. And it was funny that we were both at opposite ends of the country, and then WNCN's demise in end of 1993, and then I ended up here working with Bill out here. It's kind of an irony in a lot of ways. But the whole idea behind that, as you well know, was that it wasn't that we were the Church of the Holy Symphony or the preserver of this classical music museum or whatever. The idea was just that we were a radio station that just happened to play classical music. And it worked for quite a long time, and it worked a whole lot better than a whole lot of people did think it was going to. KDFC was actually the last remaining major market commercial classical station. Almost all the others had either gone under or had flipped to public radio before that, and that was the model that we eventually followed when we were acquired by USC. And it was, it's a great model to follow. We're loving it here as a public radio station. We have, ironically, we have much more freedom to program. We can spread out a little bit. When we were commercial, we did a lot of movements. Individual movements from larger works just to fit it in, and also because the whole atmosphere was a little bit different. What our audience told us they wanted was more of that. It was more of a continual variety rather than being able to stretch out and concentrate on complete symphonies, most of which we couldn't do anyway because of the commercial load. And it worked for that commercial audience, but as I mentioned, as a public radio station, the audience has different expectations, and we've had to adapt to that, and it's actually been great. It's been great for the station, it's been great for the audience, it's been great for us.
Right, so are you saying that as a commercial station, you are actually more of a populist station than you are now?
Yeah, I think we had to be. The listenership to commercial radio is very different. The mindset is different from publicly supported, listener-supported station. The way people listen to commercial radio is a little bit different. It's I think much less concentrated listening. I think that there's a larger proportion of the audience for a non-commercial station that is really concentrating on the music and feels very strongly about the music. The commercial radio audience, by and large, our commercial audience, was more composed of people who maybe did not know that much about classical music, but knew that they enjoyed listening to it. And I think that is true of a percentage of our audience now, but I think the percentage of those who consider themselves to be classically knowledgeable, I think that percentage is higher, and we have to serve them better than we were able to do in the commercial days.
Right, and I totally understand why you feel like a non-commercial model is better than a commercial model for so many reasons. You know, if you're generating your revenue from commercial advertisers versus member-supported local businesses, things like that, I mean, it's just much more of a community in the non-commercial model.
Oh yeah, and one of the greatest things about being non-commercial is that the arts groups around the Bay Area who used to see us as just sort of a mouthpiece, a place where they could buy advertising for their performances, now see us as a real partner. And we've been able to expand that part of our programming. We've got a thrice daily arts magazine that we run. We've got a show that runs once a month on Sunday nights featuring live performances from other arts groups around the Bay Area. We regularly carry San Francisco Opera on a monthly basis, which we weren't able to do before. We brought the Met back, which we were not able to carry when we were commercial, in addition to the San Francisco Symphony broadcasts. And we have much closer working relationships with those arts groups now. It's like we really are all partners at this point, and everybody's success feeds everybody else. So that's been a huge plus of becoming a public radio station.
Now, you guys, so you've also got translators throughout the state of California. I know, you know, KDFC had translators in Northern California. Does KUSC have translators in the southern part of the state as well?
Oh yeah, KUSC has just entered into partnership with KDB in Santa Barbara, which was huge because that station was going to go under, leaving that whole Central Coast area without a classical outlet. So that partnership is already very fruitful, and the arts partners down there in the Santa Barbara area have jumped right on board with us, and it's obviously going to be a very good partnership down there. The San Luis Obispo area, KUSC gets as far as Palm Springs, down into San Diego. With the translators down there, they pretty much cover Southern California in one form or another, and we've got a lot of the coastal area of Northern California covered. Our North Bay translator gets almost as far as Sacramento, and I don't want to tread on any toes there because we have good friends at KXBR there. And we've got also a translator up in Ukiah that covers a lot of evergreen country up there. And so it's kind of nice to have that, again, with nods to the other stations that are still working very hard to present classical music. We kind of feel like we are California's classical network in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and California is such a great state for non-commercial radio stations. It's amazing how many great non-commercial stations are
yeah, and so many different formats too. It's really neat to go up and down the coast and just hear the variety of music that's coming out of the non-commercial stations. You know, as small as they may be, they're very powerful and they're very eclectic, and they do a great job serving the public in their areas. You know, they're fulfilling their mission, which is what we're all about. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, if it weren't for those stations, people would not hear all of this music on the radio. You wouldn't hear world music. You wouldn't hear jazz. There are no commercial jazz stations. I mean, there are smooth jazz commercial stations, but no straight ahead.
Not very many even of those yet. So, yeah, we got KCSM right here in the Bay Area, who's doing a fantastic job. It's a great station. I love them. You know, you've got bluegrass, you've got Americana, you've got ethnic stations even covered on a lot of the public radio frequencies, ethnic formats. I think one of the things that's interesting is if you've got a powerhouse in one particular format, the way we kind of are with classical for our network, that leaves a lot of room for other public stations to fill in the gaps with other kinds of programming that may be missing from the airwaves, and it gives people so much more choice, you know, so many more options for listening.
Then you've got another great station in San Francisco, KQED. Do you do a little bit of work for them as well?
No, we've sort of been circling each other, eyeing each other, so not really suspiciously, but sort of like, okay, what are you going to do next? That sort of thing. They are the NPR station, KQED and KALW. KALW still does a little bit of music programming, including some classical. They get a little bit more adventurous than we can afford to get, and that's good, again, because it gives the audience choices. But KQED handles most of the NPR news and talk, and also local news and talk programming here. So there's really not a lot of overlap, and we find that obviously we share a huge portion of our audience with them. But it's not, we're sort of friendly rivals, I think, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and you guys do a lot of cool stuff on the station, a lot of interesting features that we like to participate in. One thing I think that's great, one great promotional thing that stations do is the CD of the Week feature, because programmers receive so many new releases every week, and you guys do one of those, and you do a free download of the week, which are great.
Right.
Really great little features to expose the music to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're both very successful. The audience really seems to enjoy both of those features because they are being exposed to new music. We can get a little bit more adventurous with our free download than we quite often can with the on-the-air programming. The CD of the week is a little bit trickier because, again, we're trying to, for the most part, find CDs that we can play often during the week, maybe even some tracks 2 and 3 times during the course of a given week, without having to break it up into movements, that sort of thing. And I think that the audience might give us a little bit of leeway since it's a special feature if we were to do a movement from a new recording of Brahms symphonies or something like that. But we try to avoid that when we can. But you're right. I mean, there's just so much great new music and great new recordings. Great young artists who are coming out. That's the way that we also refresh our own playlist. When in an industry, in a field where you don't get a dozen new hits every week, and not that much that we can create hits, not many chances for us to create hits, we create excitement in the playlist with new recordings, new artists who are coming to town, competition winners, young people who are making a big splash in one form or another, and keeping the recordings fresh, keeping the turnover fresh. It's so that you're not hearing the same recordings over and over again, and people who have been dead for 150 years, So I'm probably going to get into trouble for saying something like that from the people who do like historical recordings, but the way to keep the station sounding fresh is with the new recordings, really. It's the best way to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know that you moved out to San Francisco 21 years ago. How do I know that? Because
You know that because you followed us together. I mean, we were working so closely together in New York, and we both got thrown out on the street at the same time. So you took over what I'd been doing on a temporary basis, and you've made a monster out of it. I mean, the Crossover Media is just it's been so much fun to watch your progress with that little tiny sort of drib and drab of promotional stuff that I had been doing before I moved out here. And it's great to be able to maintain that contact with you too over these years, and in more than just a professional sense too.
Yeah, and we get to work together a lot, which is really enjoyable. Now, when you moved out to San Francisco, you didn't start working for KDFC right away. You worked.
No. What's funny? Again, the irony of that is one of the first people I contacted when I moved out here was Bill Luth, now my boss, who was the program director at KKHI at the time. And I said, "Hey, can I take you out to lunch? I just moved out here. What's going on with KKHI?" And he said, "Well, it's funny you should contact me because we're changing formats in a couple of weeks, and I got nothing for you." But we had lunch anyway, and kept in touch because I got a job at Reference Recordings down in Pacifica, which is just down the coast, basically as operations manager, but also associate producer and assistant engineer on a number of recordings, both classical and jazz, several of which were Grammy nominated. So I have to give myself a little prop for that. Although, I got my Recording Academy credits from those. Did that for 3 years, and then when KDFC was sold at the time to Bonneville Broadcasting, and it had been automated for its entire history up to that point, and the new owners wanted to make it live. And the previous music director, who is now completely out of the field, contacted me at Reference and said, hey, this is what's happening here. I know this is your background. If you want to get back into it again, send him a tape. So I did, and the rest is history.
So when you got to the station 18 years ago, you were the music director. You became...
Not initially. I was initially hired as afternoon drive host. Mm-hmm. And I was employee number 2 after Bill, as a matter of fact, who was at the time the music director, but being groomed to move up to program director. And when he did, it was about a year later, then I was asked to take over the job of music director in addition to my afternoon duties. And then shortly thereafter, I was moved into evenings as we brought in folks like Hoyt Smith and at the time John Evans to do morning and afternoon. Diane Nicolini was already doing middays for us at that time. And so I was moved into evenings, which meant that I could basically do my programming work during the day, voice track most of my shifts, and give myself the ample opportunity to do my primary job, which was the programming.
Now you have a long day, Rick. You're programming all day, and then you're the evening host. You're on the air.
Well, the dirty secret there is that I'm pre-recorded. That's
your voice track. I know it. I know it.
Yeah.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah, otherwise, I would be a dead person right now.
Yes.
Because on top of everything else, I got a family. I got a 12-year-old. So.
Right. And you're also the voice of the San Francisco Symphony, and you produce the segment.
I write. Well, I should say I adapt the existing program notes for the radio script for the weekly San Francisco Symphony broadcast, which it's just been announced we're being syndicated in China now. Wow. Which is really pretty cool. But I also write and produce the podcasts, the weekly podcasts, again based on the program notes. We take one of the pieces on the program each week, and I do a full-length, anywhere from 8 to 15-minute podcast, basically giving you a little bit of the history behind the piece, following the music through with inserts here and there about what's going on here, what did this mean, what does this relate to, that sort of thing, and basically give you a real in-depth overview of that piece of music. And that's been a blast. I've been doing that for the last 5 years now, and it's really taken me much farther into music that I thought I knew. And also it's allowed me to discover things that I never really knew before and have now fallen in love with. So that's great fun. And I've been doing hosting the Symphony broadcast now for almost as long as I've been here at the station. I think my first season was the 98-99 season of the Symphony.
Now you have a relationship with 3 major U.S. cities: Washington, D.C., the home of your birth,
right?
New York City,
right?
And San Francisco,
right? Which
is the most fun city to live in?
Oh boy, they're all very, very different. And what's interesting is I grew up in Washington, have not been back there in 20 years, and I'm told it's a very different city now from when I was growing up there, even though I loved growing up in Washington. There was so much to do, so much to see, and even as dysfunctional as a city as it is, it's still a great place to be, a great place to visit, and I would move back there in a heartbeat. New York is New York. It is, all the energy in the world, all packed into one little island with a few outer-lying boroughs. And I went back there, took my daughter back there for the first time last summer, and loved going back. My wife goes back there quite a bit for business, and she's a born and bred New Yorker, so it's like going home for her. I don't know as I ever really became a New Yorker, even though I lived there for 16 years. It was always a sort of a wary relationship. I loved it. I love living there, but I never really sort of embraced it. Maybe it's just the Yankees. I don't know. But
yeah, I know that, and that's another thing. Born in D.C., and you're a Boston Red Sox fan. How did that happen?
Oh, well, that was pretty easy, actually. My mom grew up in Boston. She was the one who taught me all about baseball. And when the Senators were cruelly ripped out from under us, not once but twice during my childhood, 1960 and then 1972, I was left without a baseball team. And I had been the Sox had always been sort of my second favorite team. I'd been going to games at Fenway since '68, whenever I went up to visit family there, and that just sort of was a natural for me to switch over. And I'm happy to say that my daughter is now a bi-coastal baseball fan. She loves the Giants and the Red Sox. So.
Well, that's good. Different league, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy.
It would be.
It was a little hard for her when Panda went and signed with Boston, though. And he left on such a sour note. It was really unfortunate. So, but I wish him well.
Rik, thank you so much for doing the hangout with us. And
Max, this is great. This is great. We should do this again.
Let's do it again. We'll have to figure out some other theme, but let's obviously do it again. And
and I hope that whoever's watching out there was entertained and enlightened, and
I sure was
interested in checking out what we do here at KUSC and KDFC, and be in touch if you've got any questions, anything I can tell you, help out with. If you're thinking about how we do things here, and maybe you'd like to do something like that, get in touch with us.
Truly a great station, KDFC, KUSC, really some great people and a fantastic radio group. So thanks again. Congratulations on being the featured programmer. And
thank you, Max. Thanks so much for having me on.
Back to Amanda.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Rik, so much for doing the hangout with us.
Thank you, Amanda.
So for everyone watching, we have a really great website that we're proud of, crossovermedia.net, where you can get the latest on our artists and music news, as well as great downloadable interview material on our SoundCloud page. And on that page, you can also find our Facebook and our Twitter links in the upper right-hand corner, and our YouTube page where you can watch this hangout again. So thanks again, and thanks for watching.